we'll go. All right. So here we go with the podcast. I'm here with LeBron. We're going to talk about what we've got with new players. We're going to start off talking about what a player's growth limit is, if they have a limit, and what are some of the factors that go into that growth limit. What stops you from being a good one? What are some things that seem like they stop you but they don't? And then what are ways you can get better, really? That's what I brought from this one. So I'm pulling up one of the decks I built here. It's a Scythish Harvest Hand. It's a green-white commander, and it's built with the idea of maybe a 6, a little bit above a precon. It seems to be, it's kind of pricey, but it's not really. It's in the 200 some range. But there are a lot of things that you could put in there that would drop it down. That's another thing we're going to get to is price at some point. So right off the bat, what could a player's growth limit be? And do you think it's hindered by cards, experience, or intellect?
Personally, I think a player's growth limit can be hindered by cards.
Mm-hmm.
And experience and intellect, those kind of go hand in hand, because the more experienced you are, the more you have to do card that you have. But I can come in here with a fairly specific deck. But if I don't have the right cards, I'm not going to sit here at a CEDH table and be able to hang with them.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, that does come down to player level, like what you're able to play with, how much you can intake, what you're able to process. The reason I've been thinking about this one for a bit is because I started out, I've been doing a CEDH lately and getting into, I would consider that a completely different format, honestly. Some call it Legacy of Light, which I think is pretty accurate. Because a lot of times when you sit down and you play it, people are like, hey, are you guys playing Legacy? You're like, nah, we're playing CEDH. And they're like, oh, all right, because you're playing a lot of those really old deep cuts and you're playing a lot of those really expensive cards. But the reason I think talking about the growth in the game is the more of the CEDH that I'm able to play, the better I'm becoming as a player, I feel like, because I've moved past that base deck building to where it's like, all right, I've got my ramp, I got some card draw, some removal, and now it's more like, all right, I need to figure out how to react better to tempo, right? Because the guys that I would be playing with in that level, and everybody else you're playing with in that level, they've got the tempo down, right? So you need to learn how to do tempo. You need to learn how to read the deck. Some of it has to do with memorization, I've found. Like, I've got to remember what's in that deck, how it works, what it does. Sometimes you need to remember what answers you may have. A lot of that does come with experience of playing the deck, but also being able to read the board. Have you ever heard that? That it's Magic's taken off of it's kind of like poker?
Yeah, I've heard about that.
And so some of the top players in the game that have like done GPs and taken the World Cup and all that stuff, they usually also play a little bit of gambling, right? They do some poker. I think I'm trying to think of that guy's name, but there is one fellow in particular who's actually a really fairly well established poker player. And so with that, you already know what the cards are in the deck, right? Because there's a set amount of cards. There's only 52 of them that you have to know. And so you have to memorize it, and you have to know. I mean, you can go into card count with that, but you have to know what's coming up, what's possible with on that stack whenever you're playing that game. And you also, the real big thing is you have to read what your opponents are doing. And I found that whenever, a lot of times, especially for newer people, when they're playing, and you're playing in a pod, you're not able to, they may not be able to read what the board is doing. They might not be able to read what may be happening because of the choices they made. So a lot of times it's forgivable as far as the gameplay goes, right? You can recover from making a bad decision. But when you get to that higher level, you wind up suffering pretty well because you made that bad decision.
I mean, heck, in most EDH games, one misplay can cost you the entire game immediately.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And with so much going on, it's easy to miss a lot of things, miss triggers. A lot of times if I'm playing a really big game for casual and we're in a pod, there's a lot going on. And, most of the time people don't cheat. But there's times when people will misplay because there's so much going on or they have a lot going on themselves. I know a lot of times I'll misplay some things when I'm playing my land mulch deck because it has a ton of things going on. I have a ton of triggers. So it's pretty difficult. But what minimized that was going into memorization of what the deck does and how it plays, right? So I know that if I need to search for a particular land, for example, which is the most common thing that people do, I have to start thinking 2 or 3 turns in advance. I have to start thinking, all right, well, if I play this, what am I able to cook off with once I play it? Or am I not going to be able to play it and use it this turn, but in 2 or 3 turns will actually come in clutch? So I do believe that memorization is a big part of it. What, besides from just playing the deck over and over, what do you find to be some helpful ways of doing memorization?
Making your deck list like you did with Sithis, having it so that you put in each card as you go, and you even have yourself a little sideboard. That way you can know and understand, because you understand each card, obviously, because you're trying to hold on to them for a perfect 100-card deck, but still doesn't mean you can't pop through a bunch of stuff real fast.
Mm-hmm.
There's always something better, especially with all the new sets that keep coming out and how we keep getting overloaded with new cards. That kind of plays in hand with that, is you then keep working with what you can, but you have your key pieces, the ones that no matter how many new cards come out, these cards are not going to leave your deck. Usually it's going to be win cons in some way, shape, or form.
Right. Yeah, no, that's absolutely it. With that information overload coming in from all these new sets that are coming in, I always have the hard time of saying, all right, this is a really cool card or ability, and I want to put it in the deck. And I might actually slot it in whenever I'm thinking that, and then I go to play and totally forget that I put it in there, right? So I may go looking for it off a tutor, or I may go looking for a land or something like that, and realize, oh snap, I've put this new card in here, and I completely forgot about it. Another thing too, I think, is exposure. So, all right, so let's leave this deck real quick to give an example, right? We've got in the artifact section, you have cards like Arcane Signet, right? Which nowadays kind of goes in all the decks, right? Because it's such an efficient mana rock for what it is. And it's pretty simple, you're going to add 1 mana of any color to commander's color identity. A lot of the precons come with it too, right? So you get exposed to that by seeing other people play it, because it's a very commonly used card, right? Maybe you're talking about something like Cultivate, right? A sorcery where you're paying a green and 2 colors, search your library for 2 cards, and then pull in your hand and 1 on the battlefield tapped. So a lot of times too, even though you've seen this card so many times, you might get it confused with other cards. I'll get Cultivate confused with other green ramp spells. Let me pull it up here. Like Adama's Reach, right? I mean, technically they are the same thing, right? They do very similar things, but they are different cards. So you've got the green 2 colorless, and you're searching your library for 2 basic land cards. You reveal those, put 1 to the battlefield tap and the other into your hand, and then you shuffle. Via wording, they are different, slightly, but not that different. And a lot of times it's easy to consistently see these cards and think, all right, well, this is just like the other one, but really it's a little bit different. But mechanically sound, they are the same. But then you've got things that are staples that you may not even be aware of, but other people may know. So like Karmic Justice, which is white. It's in the enchantment slot. It's a staple, right? But it's 1 white, 2 colorless. When a spell or ability an opponent controls destroys a non-creature permanent you control, you may destroy target permanent that opponent controls. So this has been around for a while. This is 2015 is whenever this one came out. It's whenever probably the latest printing that I have of it from Commander 2015. So a lot of people may be like, all right, yeah, I know what that does. But, if I'm new, I'm not going to know what it is because it's not that common, even though a lot of people think it is. But yeah, getting that memorization down, I think is pretty key as far as knowing how the deck works. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. You have to memorize what each trigger does, what it grabs, and what you can do with it. Because if not, you may have a trigger that you miss, like we said before, or you just may have a trigger and you don't do the proper thing to it. Then you lead into a misplay, possibly costing the game, especially at that CEDH level. In most casual groups, if you miss 1 or 2 triggers, it's not going to be the end of the world. But in the competitive group that we're talking about right now, if you don't know every card in your deck down to like the basics and what they need to be there for, you're not going to be able to compete with some of these people who've been doing CEDH for a very long time.
That's true. And another thing I noticed too is like a lot of these people that get into that higher level of play, they don't do it right off the bat. So, if you're thinking about, all right, well, I'm probably going to, start playing CDH and you've only played a pre-con 3 or 4 times, I really wouldn't suggest it because there's that level of interaction that goes into it, things like that. Also, if you're like, all right, I want to build just a high-powered casual deck, that may not be something that you want to get into because, it's that exposure to how everything interacts, the exposure to, a so-called meta, depending on if you're playing online or if you're playing in person. You might not want to jump up that level quite yet until you're ready to, or you have a good base knowledge of what you want to do and how you want to do it. Let's see here. So with that in mind, how far do you think memorization takes you as far as your ability to progress in the game?
It's really what's going to take you to the upper limits of CEDH. Like I said earlier, if you don't know what each and every card does in your deck, like for your mulch deck, for example, when you're searching through your library and grabbing as many lands as you can, you're trying to grab all of your fetch lands, you're trying to get all those little pieces that can help you put stuff in your graveyard, pull it back onto the battlefield, and keep just tearing through lands. That way you can keep getting your added effects. If you missed one of those, or say you grab a basic for no reason, you're just missing out on a lot of value that you could have in the later game.
Yeah, it's true. And, as far as the casual level for memorization, I think that there is that progression. I know you said earlier that you think it's the cards that limit players. Now, do you think it's just the price or the knowledge of those cards and their existence that's going to limit them?
I think it's going to be a 50-50 on that one because, certain people, you can't afford certain cards. Like, I'm not going to sit here and spend $600 on a Badlands because that's my car payment. But at the same time, there's other more realistic versions of these cards that we can use in different ways. Like, for example, the new Midnight Hunt lands, which enter the battlefield untapped when you control 2 more basics. Those are huge things that can help in a CEDH pod, but they're not gonna be what push you over the edge. Now, when it comes to card memorization, with that, if you don't know what your card does, you're not going to be able to use it effectively.
Right, and what he's talking about is like this overgrown farmland. It's this is an example of one that I've got here on the screen now. It's overgrown farmland enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands. I think this is pretty good, especially if you get it early on, because a lot of times it'll come into play untapped, kind of whenever you need it to. And I'm a big fan of these myself. But yeah, no, I'll take it away because I don't want to get too much into the CDH realm, honestly. So we'll bring it back down to the casual level. What with these price points, what do you think is a good median price point? I would say about $300 for a solid casual deck would be the upper limits of what you want to spend.
Yeah, I could see that as a high end. Like it's casual and it's powerful, but it's not going to be so weak it doesn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say 300 is a good price point. You could even probably say like almost 200 even, and you could still make a really decent deck off of that.
Oh no, absolutely. So like, I mean, if you go and take a gander at some of these pre-constructed decks that come out, and let's say you look at them, 2 years into the future, a lot of times those decks might run to, $70-$80. If they're some of the really old ones, they may be in the $150 to $300 range. And so, and those are the pre-constructed ones. And the reason is because they have all those cards that have that value, right? They can take you to it, and they're solid made pre-constructed decks. A lot of these newer ones, I was watching one of the Tolarian Community College videos talking about the value of one of these blue-white decks, and it's coming in at about $120, but you can get it for like $35, maybe $40. So I mean, it's definitely there as far as it, but you don't want to also fall into the trap of, all right, I want to spend a ton of money, $300 worth of cards, and then wind up just with a trash unplayable deck. Kind of the rule of too much of a good thing, right? So then, like you're saying, 50-50. Personally, I think that you can, if you're inexperienced, right, if you can go with a base level deck that you're comfortable with and you know how it works, and then just consistently add some upgrades to it, then you'll be golden, right? Because not everybody's going to be able to pick it up and be like, all right, well, I'm going to cherry pick these 5 cards and build a deck with them, right? You'll be able to get comfortable with it and be able to know how to upgrade it. And also with you doing that and sticking with the same type of deck over, however many months or years, you do get that familiarization with what's in it and how it works, so that you can play it efficiently, but you can also be able to know what other people are doing and how you can respond to it and how you can interact with it. Because honestly, I think that that's one of the biggest things and troubles that people have when they build a deck themselves. They don't have enough interaction, even at the lower levels, right? Maybe they don't have enough efficient board wipes. Maybe they don't have enough synergy going on within their deck. They don't have enough abilities within those creatures or enchantments that they're running to actually affect anything besides a solo play. Because what I've noticed recently is a lot of newish players that start stepping up into like a 7 or 8 realm off of precons, and they're building their own decks. Yeah, they'll go to edhrec.com that gives you recommendations, but that's not the entire deck list. It's just a recommendation based on collective data that they pulled, and they'll wind up building these decks with a whole lot of good stuff in it, but it really doesn't function that well besides playing a solitary game. And I think that that's kind of where the meta is going in general, is people playing a solitary game. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because I see that more and more. So, I mean, I'm not saying I'm not part of that, because I definitely play solitary games. Because when you go off, a lot of times you go off. But it is kind of, feel bad around the table, I've seen, when, the 4 of you are sitting there and playing, or maybe even 3 of you, and, there's threats on the board, but nobody really has an interaction that they're playing, because that's not how their deck is built. Their deck is built to, all right, I want to go through this very linear line of play, and it really relies on nobody interacting with how I play. And I think that's pretty common at the casual level, and especially the high tier casual level. So in your 8 to 10s, a lot of times it'll be a solitaire game. So you just wait and sit until you can cook something off. And I've heard of people talking about, all right, well, that's a problem for me. I don't like that. I don't like the way that plays. But that's kind of with a lot of the newer cards that are coming out, with some of the cards that have been printed in the past. It kind of just promotes that, especially if somebody's new and they're just like, I have to win this game, right? they're in that mindset of they're tired of losing and they just want to win, you wind up going into the same thing, which is like blue-green, big creature build, right? Or you're doing, 5-color, set out the biggest, craziest combo I can. So I think that's I wouldn't say like a hindrance to people's progression, but you do get stuck in that line of play. What do you think of that?
I mean, you're right. Interaction is one of the most important parts of any level of gameplay, regardless of how high or low you're in it. You need your interaction in order to either stop other players or to keep your stuff going. Even if you get into those higher casual levels, if you can't stop what somebody else is doing, it doesn't matter how well your deck is built. It's going to fall apart because you can't stop the person next to you who's going off.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's absolutely true, because I've seen high-powered decks totally fall apart because they're playing against a solid made, 6 or 7, to where they have tons of interaction, a lot of creature removal, maybe some lockout effects, a few counter spells here and there. Because I think a lot of people, I think myself included, I like to play for speed, right? So I try to go as fast and as hard as I can whenever I'm playing high level. With mid-tier, I don't like sitting there. I like doing something every turn. And so if I'm playing a deck, or I built one to where it seems like I'm not doing something, I'm not really comfortable with it, right? Even though that's kind of how it plays at that level, right? So an example would be like this deck here that I've got I'm showing everybody. This sets us. There's a lot of the same effects. There's a lot of the same synergies. You're doing something every turn. Most of the time it's just drawing and playing an enchantment, really. It's pretty simple.
Mm-hmm.
There are other things you can do with it, but you are able to play something just about every turn. It's not the most powerful thing, but there's things that you can do. There's a little bit of interaction, not much. It doesn't work on tempo, but whenever I started doing it, I was like, all right, cool. So I built this in response to some of the other lower powered decks I built. And the lower powered decks I built were, running, all right, well, I'm just going to put out a bunch of dumb creatures, right? Or I'm just going to rely on what everybody else is doing, and in order to try to build up some kind of board state. But whenever you sit down at a table and you're getting to that meta to where people are playing in a similar way, it kind of comes into, all right, well, I'm kind of just waiting to see who combos off first, right? As opposed to, all right, let's just schwack each other with a bunch of creatures. I mean, what you can do, absolutely. I mean, if you're sitting there for, an hour playing a game, you can almost guarantee everybody's going to have a huge board state set up.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that in mind, let's talk about innovation and creativity, right? So, we'll keep this on the casual level too, right? So, I think the innovation and creativity, as far as deck building, that right there is, to me, a measure of how good a player actually is, right? Are they able to put some things together that you've never seen before? Is there a certain synergy that they put together where it hasn't been played like that before? I think that is tied to exposure, also memorization, but experience as well. What do you think of the innovation part?
I agree. I mean, I really don't know how to word this, but like you said, it's exposure. Understanding the cards and understanding what you can do with different interactions, like making, I don't know, instead of a Urion Flicker deck, you make a Urion Death Matters deck where you're making these token generators that you use to kill your opponents via any type of effect to drain and gain them, whatever you have to do. basically make it aristocrat style. It'd be difficult, but I know somebody could probably sit there and make it. Would it be very good? Probably not, but it'd be very interesting, and a lot of your casual players would definitely be able to play with it because it might not be as fast, or it might not be as interactive to stop what everybody else is doing. But you could definitely just sit there and go through a whole bunch of different things, and I think that can lead to some interesting combinations that some people might not even have realized unless you took that path.
No, yeah, absolutely. And the great thing about going through and trying all this janky stuff is that you figure out a lot of cards that work, and it gets your brain going to thinking, all right, well, in this deck this card's okay, but if I put it in another deck, it's going to be just 100% amazing. And see, that's my favorite thing about building a lot of just wacky janky stuff. I'm gonna see if I have one that I built, if I can find it, that's straight wacky and janky. No, I don't think I uploaded it yet. But I did a build. Well, actually, I can use the Thantis one as an example. So there's a Thantis Warweaver one, right? To where it's janky because you're relying on Thantis's ability, right? You kind of need him out. And so if you can't get him out, then you're going to have cards that are built around him that do something similar to it. So let me pull this thing up real quick to do the live edit of it. That way everybody can see just the cards. But the cool thing about that is you get to mess with a lot of stuff that you might not have known existed. So like for me, I've got stuff in here like Birthing Pod, right? Pretty much everybody knows what it is. It's super cheap now, so at some point you'll be able to see it. It's poor man's. I can't remember the name of the card, but I've got like that in there. I've got the Brash Taunter, so that he's doing the damage. But then I've got weird stuff like Discordant Spirit, which is at the end of target opponent's turn, put a 1/1 counter on Discordant Spirit for each 1 damage dealt to you this turn. Right? So you're playing into it, and you're like, oh, this is a great card, because you know that they're going to be attacking based on your commander's ability, so that you can get those counters for it. The reason how I found out about this Discordant Spirit, going on to figuring out what weird things do, was because I picked up a big collection of older cards, and I sat down with my friends and we did a draft with just the old cards that were in these binders. So we actually just did original EDH, because I had about like 4 or 5 of the Elder Dragons from Chronicles in there. And so we just built these, and Discordant Spirit is in the build that I went with. And actually playing with it and seeing how it played, I was like, wow, I know what this would actually be really good in, right? Because you're forcing people to attack in this one. And that was exposure. I didn't know that card existed. And also, for anybody that needs to know, it is a reserve list card. But it's not too expensive for what it is and what it does. So it's worth going for. Another one is Elephant Grass, right? So it's something to bide you time. So it's a 1 green with a cumulative upkeep of 1. Black creatures cannot attack you. Non-black creatures cannot attack you unless their controller pays an additional 2 for each attacking creature. I found this just from watching a YouTube video about generic cards that are pretty good that are undervalued and underplayed, and I started using it, and I really like it because it stalls enough, right? And if they're non-black, then you can kind of slow them down because you usually have a bunch of tokens. So yeah, I think that exposure is a big part of being able to innovate and get creative with how you build your decks. Maybe you're going to go for something wacky. Maybe you're going to go for just the standard stuff. Because you'll see within most of these, you'll see a lot of the same cards. Fable Passage, Evolving Wilds, Explore. If you're in green, you're going to see those just in every single green deck. Guardian Project, that'll be another one you see everywhere. But then you get, you get some odd stuff like, let's see here. Moment's Peace. It's just a fog spell. You might find ways to play, outmaneuver. X target block creatures, deal combat damage to defending player instead of to blocking creatures this turn. Things like that. Or you may go into a deep dive and pull some of the older cards that seem like they were really bad at the time, but could actually be decent. Which is, example would be Rocks. For me, that's a big nostalgia hit, right? You may have Rocks deal its combat damage to defending players though it weren't blocked. The reason it's going to be fantastic in here, not just because it's a big fat 5/5 with your generate on it, but a lot of times you are going to get blocked, right? Because you have to attack, and so you can get that damage through. So it's another way to look at it, right? As opposed to just, all right, well, I'll just force them to attack and then, block them with a friction obliterator and make them sack permanents.
I like that because, and like you were saying earlier with Elephant Grass, it's kind of got its own personal synergy with Thantis. Even if somebody does want to attack you, maybe it sends them to another player. That way you're weakening that player and making it harder and harder for them, but much easier for you, leaving yourself with all the opportunity in the world to stop whatever every player is doing.
Right.
I think another thing, too, is, you've got all these older cards in this little deck list right here. You got a bunch of really interesting and neat things. But like you said, if you hadn't had that exposure, you would have never been able to see some of these. And with Birthing Pod, like you said, it's almost like a food chain where instead of getting mana for the creature, you get a different creature. In this deck, based off of the creature list I'm seeing right now, you're sacrificing some stuff for some high hitters like Phyrexian Swarm Lord. You've got, Dragon Lair Spider. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, put a 1/1 green insect creature token onto the battlefield. That's huge. Because not only are you going tall with Thantis, now stuff like that is going to make you go wide as well, making it much harder for each of your opponents to recover from any attacks that you lay on them.
Oh, yeah. And another thing about that, too, is like we're talking about exposure and tempo and on the deck, right? Because we have so many heavy hitters in this deck, right, there's some stupid little ones in here, too, that just serve a purpose. And the stupid hitters, I'm talking about like that infect creature that sacrifices itself. But because there's so many what would seem like very valuable stuff, there's not a lot of ways to recur those, except for a specific few. Then the question is, all right, well, how do I need to play on tempo? What decisions do I need to make in order to utilize this correctly? And so if we were sitting down with a pre-con level and we had a Birthing Pod in here, we could probably, there's tons of things that we could sack to Birthing Pod, right? But at the same time, that's taking up a valuable slot, right? So, let's say that there is just like a 1/2 creature with reach, and that's it, right? And there's several different types of creatures in this deck that are like that, to where they're just set up so that you can sacrifice them or use them to do an ability. That's great, but they're taking up a slot, right? So it makes it to where they're forgiving and they're cheap to play so that you can build your board state and you can possibly sack it to a win. But you're never guaranteed to get out, your Birthing Pod effects, right? You're never guaranteed to get out your Arachnogenesis, okay? You're not... some of these cards, they may not be on there. I might have Discordant Spirit out there, and he's a 20/20, but he's getting ready to get X by, a Destroy spell or something like that. So you have to know the deck so that you can know what to get. It's like, all right, so let's say I've got, Ignoble Hierarch out here. That'd be a prime example. At first glance, he takes up a slot, but, he is a mana dork. And so at a certain point, you can be like, all right, cool, I can sack this guy to go get something for 2. However, if you look through it, there's not a lot of things that are creatures in here at 2. So then you get stuck with sacking a creature, right? But then there's nothing to play with it. You see what I mean?
Yep.
And so that comes into knowing the deck. So if I'm going to sit here and play this pod, I'm not just going to play it just for anything. Right? If I sit here and I sack, Dragon Lair Spider it comes in at 6, so it's got 2 green, 2 red, 2 colors, so it's 6, and I sack it to Birthing Pod, I need to go find someone with 7. Well, what the hell am I going to get? I don't have any creatures in here, I don't believe, that are straight up at 7. I've got 6s and 5s. Oh, I do. I have 1 creature at 7. But what if that creature's not in there, right? And I'm not paying attention, and that creature got milled out or already played Siege Behemoth and it's in the graveyard. Then I've just pretty much burned that creature and that ability to go get nothing, right? And so a lot of times you can run into that problem to where you're like, all right, well, I feel like I know what I'm doing with my deck, but I don't know. And or you wind up doing it and you don't have a plan when you do it. You just know that you want to get something big, right? So let's say that you're like, all right, cool. I'm going to sacrifice Discordant Spirit because it's a 4-drop. All right, well, there's multiple 5-drops in here. What exactly do you want to get? Do you want to get a Brash Taunter off of that? Are you looking to go and grab Siddiqui or whatever her name is, Usurper? Are you going to go so far and grab, well, let's see here, any other 5-drops? See, they're talking about not knowing decks. I have no idea what's in this deck. I built it so long ago that I don't even know what's in it. You're limited to like 2 or 3 things, right, is my point. And if you don't know exactly what you want to go get, then you may wind up doing a little bit of a misplay, or you set yourself off tempo to where you burn a card and put it into play, and it winds up getting burned, and so then you're like, oh well, shoot, I don't know what to do now, right?
Yeah, like you said, that also comes with that memorization stuff. Between that and then kind of dropping down to a more deck building level is just knowing what cards you want to get for certain values. Like you said, you can get the Isiki, you can get a couple of other things, but at the end of the day, is that Isiki really going to help you? Like, if you're going to put a card into a card slot, not especially if it's for a combo piece, it needs to be able to do something not only on its own, but especially with that piece. Because if not, no matter what level of play you're going, you could have that card out at the very beginning of the game, and it could be the main piece that wins you the game.
That's right.
But if it doesn't have all of its pieces, the engine's not going to run.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of times the problem with that is people want to try to do, like, too much synergy, right? And so they'll make sacrifices to get that synergy going. And you lose out on, having a solid build, and you wind up just with these synergistic cards that at first glance you're like, all right, well, these are great. These are great, but they're not really progressing me anywhere. So, like, when I was first building that Sithis deck, which is enchantments, I had an idea what I wanted to play, right? So then I just went through initially and just found a whole bunch of white and green enchantments that I thought were good and started playing those. And the problem I ran into is like, yeah, I'm drawing cards, right? That's great, but I'm not doing anything. You know what I mean? I've got my synergy down, but it's too much synergy, right? I'm drawing a ton of cards, but I have no way to play them out from my hand, so then they're just going to the graveyard and I have no way to get them back. Or, I'll have this problem sometimes when I'm playing my Corval deck, which is, all right, cool. I've got all these sacrifice outlets set up, right, for my lands or whatnot, but I'm not ready to sacrifice lands because I still have to make plays. I don't have any triggers I can get off of them. Or, a lot of times, too, it's like, all right, cool. Well, I'm sacrificing these lands, and I'm drawing these 10 cards, and in these 10 cards, I don't have what I need. Well, I'm going to do it again. Well, now I'm down 20 cards I've drawn from my deck. How many more do I actually have left in here? 15? Well, shit, I can't do it again. What if this thing's to the bottom? There's no way to get it out. So you wind up maybe sometimes just drawing your deck out and decking yourself on your turn, trying to find the answer for it, because you're not paying attention to how many cards are in that deck or what you're doing. Because I'll sometimes when you're playing and you're on a roll like that and you're starting to go off, you get really excited and you mess up. I played a game with that deck, and I did Reign of Filth, which is you sacrifice a land to add black mana, and or no, it wasn't Arena of Filth. It was another one where you sacrifice a land and you add whatever mana it produces to your mana pool. And I had 12 lands out there, and 3 of those lands were fetch lands, right? And I wasn't paying attention. I'm going through, I'm cycling my lands to draw cards and get counters or whatever. And then I get to the fetch lands, and I'm like, oh shit, I calculated wrong, so I'm 3 short of what I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because I can't crack these because they came into play tapped and this whole thing, and I'm like, ah, crap. And then I'm like, so then I just start sacking other stuff to try to search through my deck to find an answer to fix what I've done. And I've been playing that deck for a while, but, it has so many mechanics going on that it's easy to get caught up in it and mess up with it. But yeah, so I want to, with that in mind, I want to circle it back around to the growth limit, right?
Mm-hmm.
I do think that there is an actual limit, right, to what you can do, because I think that there's some people that are just generally better at the game, right? There's always somebody bigger and stronger out there anyway. That's just the way life is. But I think that you could sit there and proxy some of the best cards in the game and build just the best deck that you could ever build. But if you don't have the ability to pilot that deck correctly, or you don't have that the ability to read what everybody else is playing, or you're not familiar with it, then you're just not going to win.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Personally, for me, that's what I've come up to, and luckily I've came up on that, because that's honestly for me in the game, that's the most that's the funnest part of the game for me, is finding that limit, right? Finding that threshold. Who can stop me? If somebody can stop me, great. Then that means I need to figure out how to beat them. And if I can beat them and their build, I can play around it, then that makes me a better player, right? Because you get a challenge and you're able to overcome that challenge. But there are some times when you just can't. That person is just too good, right? It doesn't matter what deck they pilot, they're just too good. And then you got to think too is, as you're moving up in your progression of learning this game and getting better at this game, there's other people that they're moving up at the same time, right? So let's say that there's that one guy that you're playing with that's just miles ahead of everybody else, right? Well, you may be like, all right, cool. I finally beat this guy with one. This one game I finally beat this guy. I went 2-0 in this game because you're playing best out of 3. I think I got it. I finally got it. Well, that fella's like, well, shoot, this guy beat me, and he had a pretty good little friend strategy. He showed me some cards I'd never seen before, and that's how he got me. How can I innovate around this to stop that from happening again? Or maybe I'll even incorporate those cards into my deck so that I can, make my deck better. So then you go to sit down with that person the next week, and they're either playing maybe the same card but in a different way, or they've figured something out around it so that they can just bypass you again, right? So they're still just a better player, right? And this is like, let's say this is in a perfect world where you have access to every card, right? You can buy whatever card you need and slot into your deck, which technically you can if you want to proxy. You can. Casual level, I don't think proxies are necessary. If you're playing casual, you're proxying, you shouldn't be playing casual. Because casual is supposed to be about playing with whatever you've got. What do you think is fun? What do you think is cool? If you're in love with a deck and you're building it, right, then you're buying those cards for that deck and you're learning with it and experiencing it. And so if it gets to the point to where it's too powerful, then you tell everybody and just move up. But you don't just proxy something, right, in a casual setting, unless it's like it's just unbearable and you just have to buy that card. But when you get to the higher levels, right, you're working in casual 10s, right, you were starting to go into CDH, I think you should proxy 100%. No questions about it, because whether you like it or not, however good of a deck builder you are, and however you could be the best player, but if you don't have like certain cards, then you're just not going to make it, I've found. But on the same hand, that person that is miles ahead of you, right? You could give them the worst deck, and if they're really good, they might get one on you, especially if you're just not experienced enough with it. It's a really good deck. I've experienced that before. I've been in that situation where I'm the miles ahead guy. I've been in the situation where I'm trying to beat that miles ahead guy. And that always seems to be the case.
There's always a hill that you have to overcome, especially when it comes to strategy in this game, because anything can happen. There's so many cards in existence at this point now that, like, there could be combinations of cards that we've never heard of or never seen. My wife plays with me all the time, and I didn't realize that she had an infant combo in one of her dinosaur decks.
Nice.
Where it literally was able to stop the whole game because it physically didn't have an end unless there was some interaction.
Right.
I can't remember the name of the dinosaur, but it was just one I recently picked up for her. If the dinosaur gets dealt combat damage...
Oh, Polyraptor.
Yes, she polyraptored me, but the problem was we couldn't stop it. I helped her build the deck, and there was no interaction to be able to stop it.
Yeah, it goes into a loop.
There was no way. Yeah, but we didn't realize it because of how the deck was built. It's not super strong. It's pretty fast. It's not crazy powerful. But then all of a sudden, there was just this infinite combo that if she had any form of ability to work with, she would have won the game. And instead, the game halted because we didn't know that was a possibility.
Yeah, usually it's with that one, Polyraptor Impact Tremors.
Mm-hmm.
And you just fucking go right the fuck off. It's pretty nuts. Yeah, I mean, it's things like that sometimes. I mean, and you know what's funny is, like, you're like, well, you know, I hadn't seen that before in that situation. I didn't know that combination, whatever combination it was. But you didn't know what combination of cards would do that, right? And it's funny that goes back into talking about, like, exposure and experience, right? I'm very familiar with that one, right? And so I know that there's tons of different ways that you can cook that off, right? So for me, it wouldn't be new, but for you, because you hadn't seen that before, it was a new thing. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yep, and absolutely.
And, you know, and I'm not saying it was that specific combo. Because, I mean, you may have found a new Polyraptor way to do it. Who knows? There's, like you're saying, so many different ways that you can do it. It's ridiculous. But yeah, it comes into, you know, that exposure. What is it that you find or can find? Like, I'm always trying to find stuff, right? I'm always trying to find an angle. That's my favorite. That's why I would just go and buy stuff. You know, I'll go buy, you know, just these crap cards if I can. You know, I'll look up and either I'm just looking straight up through a set list, right? Or maybe I catch some kind of obscure deck building YouTube channel. Maybe I'll just sit there and think, all right, well, I like what this does. Is there a way I can interact with it? And a lot of times I just go to a store and look. I look through their bulk stuff. I'm like, all right, well, let me look through your 25-cent cards. Let me look through your commons and uncommons. Because I want to see what's available to me. And I want to see how things work. That's how I started building my mulch deck. I've been playing that deck for about 2 years as Aristocrats, right? And one day I was like, you know what? It was last year when I started building that. I was like, you know what people don't really mess with? Lands. Right? And I'm like, all right, well, what are my options for straight up playing a mulch? And then I started looking at different formats, right? So I'll consistently do this. Like, currently I personally want to build a Goblin Charbelcher CDH deck because I think it's possible. But I don't know how I want to do it. So I've been looking at legacy decks where they topped 8 at a GP. I've been looking at modern decks from that era and what they ran. And the plan is, because we're playing a singleton format, I'm just going to take, you know, the single cards that are from those decks and shove them in there and run it like that. You know, I started looking at how some people are running it currently in modern, right? Because some people are. And, well, actually, I think it's in legacy they're doing it, because I don't think it's in modern now. It's too old. But I'll do that research, and I'll take those lists that people ran with and say, all right, well, this is how I'm going to make it work. On the casual level, the casual side of it, right, it's just taking that specific build and building it the way I want to, playing with it for a while, figuring out what doesn't work, and then moving from there. Where do you usually go find
couldn't
stuff from?
really put that in a better position, like you said. It's really just you have to look at each card, especially when it comes to deck building. Something that I've been doing recently. It's kind of a little home project with me and my wife is that to get her a little bit more into Magic Gathering, I have her build a deck. I sit there and help her if she has any questions on how cards interact, and then let her keep going. And I discovered something that's been working very well for her.
Mm-hmm.
She's using the combination partners, Breaches, and Malcolm. I didn't realize Double Strike is a beautiful thing for that deck, because then she gets double the triggers. So now instead of getting one treasure and one card off of me, she could be getting 4 or 5 almost, because she has multiple creatures that are attacking in one combat.
How about that?
She's been doing some dirty work in that thing. The other thing too is I've got a card in there, Arcane Adaptation, where you pick a creature type, and all of your creatures in that deck, regardless of what they are now that creature type as well.
Okay, yeah.
So we're thinking about putting in some cards that are like, if X, Y, or Z happens, deal 1 damage to each opponent. Well, if that's the case, a card like Static Wall, I believe it's called, whenever you cast instant sorcery spell, deal 1 damage to each opponent, that suddenly starts netting you 3 treasures and 3 of your opponent's cards off of just one spell with that single enchantment.
Nice. Yeah, no, see, I mean, it's things like that. It's the small stuff to where you're like, all right, cool. I didn't think it interacts like this way, but once you start playing, especially if you really like how it plays, you actively go and find, something that you want to synergize with. I'll actively find ways I want to build stuff. I'll be like, all right, well, I like the way that this interacts with, this card. What else can I play that interacts with it in such a way to where I can get more of that, right? But not really go over the edge. I still want to be pretty balanced. So yeah, I like that one. I'll tell you what, speaking of, I think we covered that pretty good. Speaking of synergies and stuff like that, I've got some green picks I wanted to share with you for cards that I think are pretty neat. So let me pull up a web page here. So the first one is Groundskeeper.